When Joshua closed his eyes for the last time, Israel stood on the brink of a new era. The generation that had witnessed the wonders of the Exodus and the conquest of the Promised Land was passing away. Now the people faced a different challenge, living in the land God had given them, surrounded by pagan nations that did not know Jehovah. The book of Judges tells this fascinating story of highs and lows, how Israel struggled to maintain its identity amid external pressures and internal temptations. It's a narrative that unfolds in cycles. The people drift away from God, suffer the consequences, cry out for help, and are rescued by exceptional leaders, the judges. These weren't kings or governors in the traditional sense, but deliverers sent by God during critical times. Let's dive into these stories that reveal not only the complexity of human nature, but also the unwavering faithfulness of God. In the first chapter of Judges, we find the people of Israel at a defining moment. With Joshua gone, who would lead them now? At the start of Judges 1, they sought divine guidance. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who of us is to go up first to fight against the Canaanites?" The answer came clearly in the next verse. The Lord answered, "Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands." And so began a new phase of conquest, with the tribe of Judah taking the lead, following divine instruction. Judah invited their brothers from the tribe of Simeon to join the battle, promising to return the favor later. In verse 4 of Judges 1, we read, "When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek." During that battle, they encountered King Adoni-Bezek, a cruel man who had mutilated 70 kings. What happened to him reveals how divine justice worked in those days. Judges 1:6-7 tells us, "Adoni-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Then Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them." The conquest continued with a series of notable victories. In Judges 1:8, the men of Judah attacked Jerusalem also and took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. After that, they went on to fight the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev, and the western foothills. One particularly memorable moment involved Caleb and his daughter Achsah. In Judges 1:12-13 we see, "And Caleb said, 'I will give my daughter Achsah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath-Sepher.' Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, so Caleb gave his daughter Achsah to him in marriage. Achsah proved to be intelligent and practical. As she was heading to her new home, she convinced her husband to ask her father for a field, but she didn't stop there. She asked for something even more valuable than dry land. In Judges 1:15, she replied, "Do me a special favor. Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." Then Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. Up to this point, things seemed to be going well. But soon, the cracks began to show. Starting in verse 21 of Judges 1, a list of failures begins to unfold. The Benjamites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. This same pattern repeats across other tribes. With each verse, a new shortcoming is revealed. Manasseh didn't drive out the inhabitants of several towns. Ephraim failed to expel the Canaanites from Gezer. Zebulun let Canaanites stay in their territory. Asher, Naphtali, Dan, all failed to fully clear out their allotted lands. Instead of driving out the pagan peoples as God had commanded, the Israelites began making compromises. Judges 1:28 puts it bluntly, "When Israel became strong, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely." This decision to coexist with the people of the land, rather than remove them, would become the root of many future problems. The consequences of their disobedience didn't take long to surface. In chapter 2 of Judges, we see a divine messenger delivering a stern message to the people. Judges 2:1-2 says, "The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this?" This was a pivotal moment in Israel's story. God reminded his people of the covenant they had made. He had fulfilled his part, delivering them from Egypt and giving them the promised land. But they had failed theirs. They didn't completely expel the pagan nations or destroy their idolatrous altars. The message continued with a severe warning in Judges 2:3. "Now therefore, I tell you that I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you." This news shook the people to their core. Judges 2:4-5 records, "When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called that place Bochim. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord." Bochim means those who weep, a name reflecting the people's emotional response to the consequences of their choices. They wept and offered sacrifices, showing remorse, but the damage had already been done. God's decision was final. The nations they had spared would remain in the land, a constant test for Israel. This event at Bochim marks a turning point in the narrative. The Israelites had broken the covenant, and now they would live with the consequences. The peoples they had spared out of convenience would become a source of ongoing temptation and trouble. The angel's message at Bochim wasn't just a judgment, it was a warning about what lay ahead. The gods of those nations would become a snare, pulling the Israelites away from the one true God. The pagan nations would be like thorns, bringing pain and hardship upon Israel. This encounter at Bochim serves as a powerful reminder. Our choices have consequences. When we ignore God's commands for the sake of ease or comfort, we often set ourselves up for greater troubles down the line. God's mercy was still present. He hadn't abandoned his people, but his discipline was there too. Some consequences of disobedience cannot be undone, even with genuine repentance. The biblical text pauses the narrative to tell us about the final days of Joshua and what happened afterward. In Judges 2:6-7 we read, "After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel." Joshua, Moses' successor, had led the people in the initial conquest of the Promised Land. He was an example of faithfulness and courage. Judges 2:8-9 tells us, "Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance, at Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash." With Joshua's death, a significant chapter in Israel's history came to a close. He was the last great leader who had personally witnessed the miracles of the Exodus. As long as he lived, and as long as the elders who had seen God's mighty works remained, the people stayed faithful. These leaders were a living memory of divine power and faithfulness. But then, something tragic happened, as shown in Judges 2:10. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. This simple sentence conveys a massive tragedy. In just one generation, the living knowledge of God and his mighty acts was lost. The children and grandchildren of those who had walked through the Red Sea on dry ground had no personal experience with Yahweh. To them, the stories of the Exodus, the manna in the desert, and the fall of Jericho's walls were just that, stories, not lived realities. This loss of spiritual memory had immediate consequences. Without a living knowledge of God, the new generation easily turned to other gods. Judges 2:11-13 shows us, Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. Instead of worshipping the God who had delivered their parents from slavery, they turned to the gods of the Canaanites. Baal was considered the god of rain and fertility, and Ashtoreth, or Asherah, was a fertility goddess. In an agricultural land like Canaan, where rainfall was vital for survival, the temptation to worship these gods was strong. The tragedy wasn't just that one generation forgot the Lord, but that they filled that void with false gods. Human nature seems to abhor a spiritual vacuum. When the knowledge of the true God is lost, idols quickly take his place. This situation highlights the vital importance of passing on faith to future generations. It's not enough for parents to know God. They must ensure that their children come to know him personally as well. From this point in the book of Judges, we see the beginning of a recurring pattern that will define the rest of the book. It's a cycle that begins with the people's sin, leads to oppression by enemies, continues with a cry to God, and ends with divine deliverance through a judge. Judges 2:14-15 shows the first part of this cycle, sin leading to servitude. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. The language here is strong. God gave them over and sold them to their enemies. This doesn't mean he abandoned them, but rather that he withdrew his special protection, allowing them to suffer the natural consequences of their choices. When they rejected the Lord as their God, they lost the Lord as their protector. But the cycle doesn't end in oppression. The God of Israel is a merciful God. Judges 2:16 tells us, "Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders." Here we see the rise of the judges who give the book its name. These leaders were not primarily legal authorities, but rather deliverers, raised up by God to rescue the people when they cried out for help. However, even with these deliverers, the people kept returning to sin. Judges 2:17 says, "Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them." They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors, who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. The phrase "prostituted themselves" is significant. In the Bible, the relationship between God and Israel is often likened to a marriage. Worshipping other gods was like committing spiritual adultery, betraying their covenant with Yahweh. In Judges 2:18-19, we see the full cycle. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies, as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshipping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. This pattern, sin, servitude, supplication, salvation, repeats over and over throughout the book of Judges. Each cycle seems to worsen, with the people falling into even deeper sin after each deliverance. It's a downward spiral that reflects humanity's tendency to quickly forget hard-learned lessons. The final verses of the chapter, Judges 2:20-23, reveal God's decision to use the remaining nations in Canaan as a test for Israel. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, "Because this nation has violated the covenant I ordained for their ancestors and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I will use them to test Israel and see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it as their ancestors did." We now come to the third chapter of Judges, where we're introduced to Othniel, the first of the judges whom God raised up to deliver Israel. But before telling his story, the text explains why God left some nations in the land. In Judges 3:1-2 we read, "These are the nations the Lord left to test all those Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars in Canaan. He did this only to teach warfare to the descendants of the Israelites who had not had previous battle experience." Here we find a practical reason for these nations being left behind: to train the new generations of Israelites in the art of war. A nation surrounded by enemies had to know how to defend itself. Without that experience, they would be left vulnerable to attacks. Judges 3:3 specifies which nations these were: the 5 rulers of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians and the Hivites, living in the Lebanon mountains from Mount Baal Hermon to Lebo Hamath. These nations would serve a divine purpose. As explained in Judges 3:4, they were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands, which he had given their ancestors through Moses. Unfortunately, instead of resisting pagan influence, the Israelites embraced it. Judges 3:5-6 tells us the Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods. This is exactly the kind of behavior God had forbidden. Intermarriage with pagan peoples inevitably led to the worship of their gods, as it did here. The result was predictable. Judges 3:7-8 reports, "The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram-Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. Aram-Naharaim refers to the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq. Cushan-Rishathaim, whose name means Cushan of double wickedness, was a powerful king who extended his rule into Canaan, subjugating the Israelites. For 8 long years, the people suffered under this foreign oppression. Finally, they did what they should have done from the start. They cried out to God for help. Judges 3:9 tells us about God's response. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised up for them a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. Othniel wasn't a stranger. He had already been mentioned in Chapter 1 as the man who conquered Kiriath-Sepher and won the hand of Achsah, Caleb's daughter. He was from the tribe of Judah, the nephew of the great Caleb, one of the 2 spies who had brought back a positive report of the land 40 years earlier. In Judges 3:10, we see how God empowered him for the task. The Spirit of the Lord came on him so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. This is the first mention in the book of Judges of someone being empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, a theme that will appear again with later judges. The victory didn't come through human strength or skill, but through the power of God's Spirit. The result was Israel's deliverance, as shown in Judges 3:11. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. This 40-year period of peace was one of the longest during the era of the Judges. Under Othniel's leadership, the people apparently remained faithful to God. But as we'll see, once he died, the cycle began all over again. After Othniel's death, the familiar pattern repeated itself. In Judges 3:12, we read, "Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel." Moab was a nation east of the Dead Sea, descended from Lot, Abraham's nephew. Though related to the Israelites, the Moabites were often their enemies. On this occasion, Eglon formed a coalition, as we see in Judges 3:13, getting the Ammonites, and Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The city of palms refers to Jericho, the first city Israel had conquered upon entering the Promised Land. Its fall to Eglon symbolized a reversal of Joshua's earlier victories. The Moabite oppression lasted longer than the Mesopotamian one. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years, Judges 3:14. For nearly 2 decades, they lived under foreign rule. As before, the people eventually cried out to the Lord for help. And as before, God responded by raising a deliverer. In Judges 3:15, again the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Gera the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Ehud was from the tribe of Benjamin, which ironically means son of my right hand. Curiously, he was left-handed, which set him apart. This seemingly minor detail would prove crucial. Ehud's plan to free Israel involved a political assassination. Judges 3:16 says, "Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing." The strategy was clever. As a left-handed man, Ehud strapped the sword to his right thigh, an unexpected place for guards to check. Normally, a right-handed man would carry his weapon on the left side for easier access. Ehud was sent as an official envoy to deliver tribute to Eglon. Judges 3:17-18 recounts, he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who had carried it. But after leaving the palace, Ehud returned with a secret message. Judges 3:19-20 explains, "But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, 'Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you.' The king said to his attendants, 'Leave us.' And they all left. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, 'I have a message from God for you.' As the king rose from his seat, the timing was perfect. Eglon was alone, having dismissed his guards to receive a secret message. He had no idea that the message from God would come in the form of a sword. Judges 3:21-22 describes what happened next. Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the bear handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. The graphic description explains why the text emphasized that Eglon was a very fat man. His obesity contributed to his death. The fat closed over the blade, preventing external bleeding that might have alerted the guards. Ehud then made his escape, as detailed in Judges 3:23-26. Then Ehud went out to the porch, shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace. They waited to the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the doors, they took a key and unlocked them. There, they saw their lord fallen to the floor, dead. While they waited, Ehud escaped, passed by the idols, and fled to Seirah. The delay in discovering the body gave Ehud enough time to get away and organize an attack. In Judges 3:27 it says, "When he arrived in the hill country of Ephraim, he blew a trumpet, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with Ehud leading them." With the Moabite leader dead, Ehud led an assault on the occupying forces. Judges 3:28-29 recounts, "Follow me," he ordered, "for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands." So they followed him and took possession of the fords of the Jordan that led to Moab. They allowed no one to cross over. At that time they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not one escaped. The outcome was another long period of peace, as shown in Judges 3:30. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. The story of Ehud shows how God can use unique traits, such as being left-handed, to accomplish his purposes. What might seem like a disadvantage or quirk became part of the divine plan to deliver his people. After this detailed account of Ehud, the biblical text briefly mentions another judge. In a single verse, Judges 3:31, we are introduced to Shamgar. After Ehud came Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. He, too, saved Israel. This short account stands in stark contrast to the more elaborate narratives of other judges. Yet even in this brief verse, there are fascinating details. First, Shamgar fought against the Philistines, a people who would later become Israel's main enemy during the time of Samuel and David. Originating from the Aegean region, possibly Crete, the Philistines had settled along the southwestern coast of Canaan, forming a confederation of 5 city-states: Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. They were technologically advanced, especially in metalwork, and militarily formidable. Teach, named Shamgar, son of Anath, is intriguing. Anath was the name of a Canaanite goddess of war. Some scholars suggest this might imply Shamgar had non-Israelite origins or came from a family that formerly worshipped Canaanite gods. What stands out most is the weapon Shamgar used: an ox goad. This wasn't a weapon of war, but an agricultural tool used by farmers to prod oxen while plowing. It was a long stick with a sharp metal point on one end and a small shovel on the other for cleaning the plow. In untrained hands, an ox goad would be a poor weapon. But Shamgar, likely a farmer, well versed in using it, turned it into a deadly instrument. The story tells us he killed 600 Philistines with this improvised tool. The fact that he used a farming implement instead of a conventional weapon might reflect the broader situation in Israel at the time. The Philistines were known for restricting Israel's access to iron technology, preventing them from manufacturing weapons. In 1 Samuel 13:19-22, a later period, we read, "Not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, 'Otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears.'" This policy of technological control may have already existed in Shamgar's time, forcing him to improvise with what was available. The number of enemies slain, 600, is extraordinary for a man armed only with a farm tool. This suggests that Shamgar's victory, like those of other judges, was not merely human effort, but a demonstration of God's power working through him. The final phrase, "He too saved Israel," indicates that Shamgar's impact was significant despite the brevity of the account. Perhaps he delivered only a part of Israel, since the Philistines were mainly located in the southwest, or maybe his victory was so decisive that it secured a period of peace. In chapters 4 and 5 of Judges, we find one of the most fascinating stories in the book, the saga of Deborah and Barak against Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite army. This narrative introduces us to the only female among the major judges, and one of Israel's most admirable leaders. As usual, the story begins with the people falling back into sin. Judges 4:1-2 tells us, after Ehud died, the Israelites, once again, did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Haroshath Hagoyim. Hazor was a major city in northern Canaan, and Jabin, the wise, was likely a dynastic title similar to Pharaoh in Egypt. The book of Joshua mentions that a king named Jabin of Hazor had been defeated earlier, Joshua 11. But apparently the city had regained its power. This time, the oppression was severe. Judges 4:3 states, Jabin had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help. The iron chariots represented the advanced military technology of the time, something the Israelites did not possess. This technological superiority allowed Jabin to harshly oppress the people for 2 decades. When the people finally cried out, God had already prepared a deliverer. In Judges 4:4-5, we are introduced to her. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. Deborah was already an established leader before the war against Jabin. As a prophetess, she received and conveyed messages from God. As a judge, she resolved disputes among the people. The fact that she had a designated place where people sought her counsel under the palm of Deborah shows that her authority was widely recognized. Following divine direction, Deborah summoned Barak to lead Israel's army. Judges 4:6-7 says, she sent for Barak, son of Abinoam from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. Barak's response reveals both faith and hesitation. Judges 4:8 says, Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go. Barak was willing to face Sisera's formidable army, but he wanted Deborah, the representative of God, by his side. Perhaps he needed continual reassurance that God would be with him, or maybe he recognized Deborah's wisdom and spiritual leadership. Deborah's reply in Judges 4:9 is prophetic. Certainly I will go with you, said Deborah, but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. This prophecy would be fulfilled in a surprising way, but not in the way Barak might have imagined. The woman to receive the honor would not be Deborah, but another. Preparations for battle began. Judges 4:10 says, there Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. Meanwhile, in Judges 4:11, we're given a seemingly minor detail that will prove crucial. Now Heber, the Kenite, had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zaanannim near Kadesh. The battle was imminent. Sisera was informed of Barak's movements and mobilized his forces. Judges 4:12-13 says, when they told Sisera that Barak son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera summoned from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River all his men and his 900 chariots fitted with iron. The decisive moment arrived. Judges 4:14 says, then Deborah said to Barak, go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? So Barak went down Mount Tabor, with 10,000 men following him. The strategy to position the troops on Mount Tabor was brilliant. Iron chariots, the enemy's main advantage, were effective on flat ground, but useless on steep slopes. By descending the mountain at the right moment, the Israelite forces gained the element of surprise and used gravity to their advantage. The result was an overwhelming victory, as described in Judges 4:15-16. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. The phrase, the Lord routed Sisera, indicates divine intervention. Deborah's song, chapter 5, suggests a torrential rain turned the battlefield into a muddy quagmire, neutralizing the advantage of the iron chariots. Meanwhile, Sisera fled on foot. Judges 4:17 says, Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Here we see the importance of that earlier, minor detail about Heber. Sisera sought refuge in Jael's tent, assuming safety due to the alliance between her family and King Jabin. Jael welcomed Sisera with apparent hospitality while concealing her true intentions. Judges 4:18-20 recounts, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone in there?' say no." Exhausted from battle and comforted by the milk, Sisera fell into a deep sleep. It was his final vulnerability. Judges 4:21 says, "But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. When Barak arrived in pursuit, Sisera was already dead." Judges 4:22 states, "Just then Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. 'Come,' she said, 'I will show you the man you're looking for.' So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. Thus Deborah's prophecy was fulfilled. The Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. It wasn't Deborah herself, nor a warrior, but Jael, a seemingly ordinary woman who received the honor of defeating the enemy commander. The chapter ends with a summary of the battle's outcome in Judges 4:23-24. That day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him. Chapter 5 contains the Song of Deborah, one of the oldest poems in the Bible, celebrating the victory. It's a poetic text, rich with vivid imagery and historical detail that complements the prose narrative of chapter 4. The song opens with praise to God and Israel's leaders in Judges 5:2-3. When the princes in Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord. Hear this, you kings, listen, you rulers. I, even I, will sing to the Lord. I will praise the Lord, the God of Israel, in song. Deborah and Barak are remembered as God's instruments in this deliverance. Not all tribes took part in the battle. Some are praised for their involvement, while others are criticized for their absence. The forces of nature, stars, rivers, and rain, are depicted as fighting alongside Israel. The death of Sisera is portrayed poetically, and Jael is exalted in Judges 5:24-27. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for nobles, she brought him curdled milk. Her hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head, she shattered and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank, he fell. There he lay. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. The poem ends with a powerful prayer in Judges 5:31. So may all your enemies perish, Lord, but may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. And the land had peace for 40 years. This story shows how God can use anyone, whether a prophetess like Deborah, a hesitant general like Barak, or a non-Israelite woman like Jael, to fulfill his purposes and deliver his people. Once again, the Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. The peace that lasted 40 years after Deborah and Barak's victory had come to an end. At the beginning of Judges 6, we read, "The Lord gave them into the hands of the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were distant relatives of the Israelites, descendants of Abraham through his second wife, Keturah. But at this point in history, they had become cruel oppressors. They didn't come to occupy the land, but to plunder it. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites swarmed in like a cloud of locusts. Judges 6:3-4 describes how they attacked. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. It was a full-scale assault on Israel's economy and survival. This wasn't a permanent occupation, but seasonal raids that left the people with no food and no hope. The invaders came in massive numbers, bringing their livestock and tents. Judges 6:5 tells us they came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. The result was extreme misery for Israel. Judges 6:6 says, Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. When the people finally cried out, God first sent a prophet to remind them why they were suffering. In Judges 6:7-10, this unnamed messenger recounted the story of their deliverance from Egypt and how God had driven out the nations before them. He ended with a direct accusation. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me. This was the pattern we've seen throughout Judges. The people forget. God suffer under their enemies, cry out for help, and God sends a deliverer. Now, a new deliverer was about to emerge, an unlikely man named Gideon. In a small town called Ophrah, a young man was secretly threshing wheat in a winepress, a place meant for crushing grapes, not for processing grain. He was hiding out of fear of the Midianites. His name was Gideon, son of Joash from the tribe of Manasseh. Suddenly, something extraordinary happened. Judges 6:11-12 says, The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abizrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared, to Gideon he said, The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. That greeting must have shocked Gideon. He certainly didn't see himself as a warrior, let alone a mighty one. He was hiding, afraid of the Midianites. His response reveals his frustration and doubt. Pardon me, my lord, Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now, the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. The angel's response in Judges 6:14 is powerful. The Lord turned to him and said, Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? But Gideon was still unsure. He saw himself as the least important, member of the weakest clan. Pardon me, my lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. The Lord assured him, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. Even so, doubt lingered in Gideon's heart. He asked for a sign to confirm that he was truly speaking to a divine messenger. He prepared an offering, a young goat and unleavened bread, and brought it to the angel, who told him to place the food on a rock and pour the broth over it. Then the angel touched the offering with the tip of his staff, and fire flared from the rock and consumed everything. The angel disappeared. Gideon then realized who he had been speaking to. In Judges 6:22, he exclaimed, Alas, sovereign Lord! I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. There was a common belief that seeing God directly meant certain death, but the Lord comforted him. Peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die. In response to this extraordinary encounter, Gideon built an altar and called it, The Lord is Peace. But the true test of his newfound faith came immediately afterward. That same night, the Lord gave Gideon a frightening command. Take your father's bull, the second bull, 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering. This was a dangerous mission. Baal was the main god of the Canaanites, considered the god of rain and fertility. During times of drought, like the one they were facing, many Israelites had turned to Baal, hoping he would bring rain. Asherah was a fertility goddess, often represented by wooden poles. Gideon obeyed, but fear still lingered in his heart. Judges 6:27 tells us, "So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him, but because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime." The next morning, the townspeople discovered what had happened. Furious, they went to Joash's house and demanded that he hand over his son. "Bring out your son. He must die, because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." Joash's response took everyone by surprise. Instead of surrendering his son, he defended him. "Are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." It was a simple yet powerful argument. If Baal was truly a god, why would he need humans to protect him? Why hadn't he punished Gideon himself? From that day on, Gideon was given a new name, Jerubbaal, meaning "let Baal contend with him," because, as his father said, "Let Baal contend with him, for he broke down Baal's altar." It wasn't long before the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples gathered once more for another invasion. They crossed the Jordan River and camped in the valley of Jezreel, one of the most fertile areas in Israel. At this critical moment, something extraordinary happened to Gideon. Judges 6:34 tells us, "Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites to follow him." The same Spirit that had empowered earlier judges now came upon this fearful young man, transforming him into the leader Israel needed. Gideon sent messengers throughout the region, calling on the tribes of Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. Surprisingly, they responded, and men from all those tribes rallied to him. Even with an army forming around him and the Spirit of God upon him, Gideon still wrestled with doubt. He asked God for another sign of confirmation. In Judges 6:36-37, he prayed, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." The next morning, that's exactly what happened. Gideon got up early, squeezed the fleece, and filled a bowl with water from the dew that had fallen on it, while the ground around it remained dry. Still, Gideon asked for one more sign, this time reversing the test. In Judges 6:39, he said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew." Once again, God granted Gideon's request. The next morning, the fleece was dry while the ground around it was soaked with dew. These signs, especially the one where the fleece stayed dry while the surrounding ground was wet, were deeply meaningful. In the Bible, dew often symbolizes divine blessing. In the first test, only the fleece, perhaps representing Gideon or Israel, received the blessing. In the second, the blessing extended to the entire surrounding area, suggesting that Israel's victory would bring blessings to the whole region. More importantly, these signs confirmed to Gideon that God was truly with him and that victory was certain. The fearful young man hiding in the winepress was becoming a bold leader, ready to face the enemy. Gideon's army grew rapidly. 32,000 men responded to his call, an impressive number, especially considering the fear. The Midianites inspired, but the Lord had other plans. Judges 7.2 reveals God's thinking. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me, saying, 'My own strength has saved me.'" God wanted it to be crystal clear that the victory would come from him, not from Israel's military power. So he told Gideon to reduce the size of the army. First, he was to announce, "Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." The result was staggering. 22,000 men left, and only 10,000 remained. 2/3 of the army openly admitted their fear and went home, but even 10,000 was too many, according to the Lord. So he proposed another test. In Judges 7:4-5 we read, "But the Lord said to Gideon, 'There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go.' So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, 'Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink.'" The test was simple, but revealing. Those who knelt to drink put themselves in a vulnerable position. If the enemy attacked, they wouldn't be ready. But those who scooped the water to their mouths with their hands stayed alert, watching their surroundings, ready for danger. The result was striking. 300 men drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." Now Gideon had only 1% of his original army, from 32,000 down to 300. From a human perspective, it seemed like madness to face the Midianites with such a small group. Judges 7:12 tells us that the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. The contrast couldn't have been more dramatic. 300 Israelites against an enemy too numerous to count. But God had a plan, and Gideon was now ready to follow it, no matter how impossible it seemed. That night, the Lord spoke to Gideon again. "Get up, go down to the camp, for I have given it into your hands. But if you're afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. After that, you will have the courage to attack the camp." This invitation acknowledged Gideon's humanity. God knew he was still afraid and offered him a way to strengthen his faith. So Gideon and his servant went down to the edge of the enemy camp. What they saw must have been intimidating: a sea of tents, camels, and armed warriors. Judges 7:12 describes the scene. The Midianites, Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. As they approached the camp, they overheard two men talking. One of them was sharing a dream. "I had a dream," he said. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck a tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." The other man responded with an immediate interpretation. "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideon heard this, he worshipped God. His fear turned into faith. He returned to the Israelite camp and shouted, "Get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Then Gideon divided the 300 men into 3 companies. He gave each man a trumpet and an empty jar with a torch inside. His instructions were clear and unusual. "Watch me, follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then you blow yours around the whole camp and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" It was a surprising strategy, one that didn't involve swords, spears, or bows, the typical weapons of the time. Instead, It relied solely on sound and light. In the middle of the night, Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after the guards had been changed. They blew their trumpets and smashed the jars in their hands. All 3 companies blew their trumpets and broke their jars. Holding the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" The effect was immediate and devastating. Judges 7:21-22 tells us, while each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. Chaos erupted. Startled awake in the middle of the night, surrounded by trumpets and blazing torches, the Midianites believed they were under attack by a vast army. In their panic, they turned on one another. The Midianite army fled as far as Beth Shittah towards Zererah and to the border of Abel-Meholah near Tabbath. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth-barah." All the men of Ephraim were called out, and they took the waters as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. They captured 2 Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. The initial battle was a stunning victory, but the war wasn't over. The Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, were still on the run with about 15,000 men. The last of the Eastern Army. 120,000 soldiers had already fallen in the first attack. Before going after the kings, Gideon had to handle internal conflict. The men of Ephraim were upset they hadn't been called at the start of the battle. In Judges 8:1, they confronted him. "Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they argued fiercely with him. Gideon's response was diplomatic and wise. Rather than point out that they hadn't answered the earlier call, he praised their contribution. "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim better than the full harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" This answer calmed them. Gideon showed he valued Israel's unity over personal pride. He honored Ephraim's role and downplayed his own. It was the mark of a true leader. With the conflict resolved, Gideon and his 300 men continued the pursuit. They were exhausted but still chasing the Midianite kings. When they reached Succoth, they asked for help. "Please give my men some bread. They are worn out, and I'm still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." The leaders of Succoth gave a disappointing answer. "Do you already have Zebah and Zalmunna in your hands? Why should we give bread to your troops?" Gideon promised to return and punish the town. The same thing happened in Peniel, the next city along the way. No one offered support. Eventually, Gideon caught up with Zebah and Zalmunna in Karkor. They had about 15,000 men, what remained of the Eastern Army. Gideon attacked and captured the 2 kings, throwing their entire force into retreat. On the way back, Gideon kept his word and punished the towns that refused to help. In Succoth, he captured a young man and had him list the names of the city's officials, 77 men. Then he said to the leaders, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, 'Do you already have them in your hands? Why should we give bread to your exhausted men?'" And he punished the leaders of the city. In Peniel, he tore down the city's tower and killed the men who had refused aid. Then he turned his attention to the captured kings. Judges 8:18-19 recounts his conversation. Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" They answered, "Men like you, each one looked like a son of a king." Gideon replied, "Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you." This revelation changed everything. The Midianite kings had killed Gideon's brothers, turning this from a national conflict into a personal vendetta, in line with the laws of the time that required the nearest relative to avenge the shedding of innocent blood. Gideon ordered his eldest son, Jether, to execute the kings, but the boy hesitated out of fear. He was still just a youth, so the kings urged Gideon to do it himself. "Come, do it yourself. As is the strength of a man, so is his deed." Gideon killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took the crescent-shaped ornaments that hung on their camels' necks. After this great victory over the Midianites, the people of Israel wanted to make Gideon their king. Judges 8:22 says, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian." It was a tempting offer. Gideon had demonstrated strong leadership, had earned the people's respect, and now was being offered a dynasty, not just a personal reign, but a line of rulers from his descendants. But Gideon's answer was clear and resolute. "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." This response revealed that Gideon understood Israel's unique identity. Unlike neighboring nations, Israel was not meant to have a human king. Its constitution, the law of Moses, established a theocracy. God was the king, with human judges applying his law. To install a human king would be a rejection of divine sovereignty, as Samuel would later explain to the people. However, despite this noble refusal, Gideon made a request that would have serious consequences. He said, "I have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." The enemies had worn gold earrings, as was customary among the Ishmaelites. The people agreed readily, "We will give them." They spread out a cloak, and each man threw in a gold earring from his share of the plunder. The total weight of the gold came to 1,700 shekels, about 20 kilograms, not including the ornaments, pendants, and purple garments worn by the kings of Midian or the chains from their camels' necks. With all that gold, Gideon made an ephod, a ceremonial priestly garment, and placed it in Ophrah, his hometown. What may have seemed like a harmless or even pious act had a devastating result. Judges 8:27 tells us, "All Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family." It's striking that Gideon, who began his career by tearing down an altar to Baal, ended up creating an object that became an idol to Israel. That was never his intention, but that was the outcome. The ephod, perhaps meant to honor God, ultimately replaced genuine worship at the tabernacle in Shiloh. Following this victory, the land had peace for 40 years during Gideon's lifetime. The Midianites never rose again, and Israel lived in safety. Gideon returned home to live out the rest of his days. He had many wives and 70 sons. He also had a son by his concubine in Shechem, whom he named Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Judges 8:33-35 offers a sad summary of what happened after his death. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal-berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show any loyalty to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in spite of all the good things he had done for them. After Gideon's death, the cycle of apostasy continued, but this time the threat came from within. Abimelech, the son of Gideon and his concubine from Shechem, saw an opportunity for power. He lacked his father's character and respect for God's rule over Israel. In Judges 9:1-2 we read, "Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem, and said to them and to all his mother's clan, 'Ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man?' Remember, I am your own flesh and blood. Abimelech leveraged his half-Shechemite heritage to gain the support of the city's citizens. He also exploited the natural division between the Canaanite population of Shechem and Gideon's Israelite descendants. He framed the situation as a false choice: be ruled by 70 men or by just one, himself. His mother's brothers repeated his words to all the citizens of Shechem, and they were inclined to follow Abimelech, saying, "He is our brother." They gave him 70 silver shekels from the temple of Baal-berith, which he used to hire some reckless scoundrels who followed him. Abimelech's first act was to eliminate his rivals. He went to his father's home in Ophrah and, on a single stone, killed his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. Only Jotham, the youngest son, escaped by hiding. After this brutal act, Abimelech was proclaimed king by the leaders of Shechem. Judges 9:6 tells us, "Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king." This marked a critical turning point in Israel's history. For the first time, an Israelite was declared king, directly contradicting Gideon's earlier declaration that the Lord will rule over you. When Jotham, the sole surviving brother, heard about it, he climbed to the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to the people, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you." Then he told a powerful parable about trees looking for a king. In the story, the trees wanted to anoint one of them as king. First, they invited the olive tree, then the fig tree, then the vine. Each one refused, choosing instead to keep producing its valuable fruit. Finally, they offered the kingship to the thorn bush, which accepted, but with a threatening condition. "If you really want to anoint me as king over you, come and take shelter in my shade. If not, fire will come out from the thorn bush and consume even the cedars of Lebanon." The message of the fable was clear. The useful trees, the olive, the fig, the vine, represented worthy leaders who preferred to serve in productive ways. The thorn bush, useless and dangerous, represented Abimelech. And the threat of fire from the thorn bush was a prophecy. The alliance between Shechem and Abimelech would end in destruction. Jotham ended his speech with a direct challenge. "If you have acted in good faith and with honor in making Abimelech king, if you have treated Jerubbaal and his family well and repaid him for what he did, then rejoice in Abimelech and let him also rejoice in you. But if you have not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come out from the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo and consume Abimelech." After that, Jotham fled to Beer and settled there, far away from his brother Abimelech. For 3 years, Abimelech ruled over Israel, but then God sent an evil spirit between him and the citizens of Shechem, who began to act treacherously against him. God was bringing justice upon Abimelech for the violence he had done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal. The city of Shechem began to rebel. Men hid in the hills to ambush and rob travelers, and someone reported this to Abimelech. A man named Gaal, son of Ebed, moved to Shechem with his relatives and won the trust of the citizens. During the harvest festival in the temple of their god, as they ate and drank, they began cursing Abimelech. Gaal said, "Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Isn't he Jerubbaal's son, and isn't Zebul his officer? Serve the descendants of Hamor, Shechem's ancestor. Why should we serve Abimelech?" These words reached Zebul, the city's governor, who became furious. He secretly sent messengers to Abimelech. "Gaal, son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem and are stirring up the city against you. Come by night with your men and hide in the fields. At sunrise, launch your attack on the city. When Gaal and his men come out to fight, do with them as you see fit." Abimelech followed the plan. When Gaal saw men coming down from the hills, he said to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the hilltops." But Zebul replied, "You're just seeing shadows on the hills. They only look like men." Gaal insisted, "No, look! People are coming down from the center of the land, and another group is coming along the road by the diviner's oak." Then Zebul said, "Where is your big talk now? You said, 'Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him?' These are the men you were mocking. Go out now and fight them." Gaal led the people of Shechem into battle against Abimelech, but they were defeated and fled. Many men from Shechem were wounded and fell along the road as far as the city gate. The next day, when the people of Shechem went out into the fields, someone informed Abimelech. He took his men, divided them into 3 companies, and hid in the fields. When he saw the people coming out of the city, he and his men rose up and attacked them. Abimelech and his group took their position at the city gate, while the other 2 companies attacked those in the fields and killed them. Abimelech fought against the city all day. He captured it, killed its people, destroyed it, and scattered salt over it, a symbolic act of cursing. When the leaders in the Tower of Shechem heard what happened, they took refuge in the stronghold of the temple of El-Berith. When Abimelech learned that they were all gathered there, he went to Mount Zalmon with his men. He took an axe, cut some branches, and placed them on his shoulders. Then he said to his men, "Quick, do what you've seen me do." So everyone cut branches and followed Abimelech. They piled the branches against the stronghold and set it on fire. All the people in the Tower of Shechem died. About 1,000 men and women. Jotham's prophecy was coming true. Fire was coming out of the thorn bush and consuming the men of Shechem. But the second part of the prophecy, fire from Shechem, consuming Abimelech, was still to come. Abimelech went to Thebez, laid siege to it, and captured it. However, there was a strong tower in the city center. All the men and women of the city fled there, locked themselves inside, and went up to the rooftop. Abimelech approached the tower to burn it down, but a woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and crushed his skull. He quickly called his armor-bearer and said, "Draw your sword and kill me, so they can't say a woman killed me." So the servant ran him through, and he died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they all went home. In this way, God repaid Abimelech for the evil he had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. And God also brought down on the heads of the people of Shechem the evil they had committed. Thus, Jotham, son of Jerubaal's curse, was fulfilled. After Abimelech's death, Tola, son of Puah, grandson of Dodo from the tribe of Issachar, rose to deliver Israel. He lived in Shamir, in the hill country of Ephraim, and led Israel for 23 years. Then he died and was buried in Shamir. After him came Jair of Gilead, who led Israel for 22 years. He had 30 sons, who rode 30 donkeys, and controlled 30 towns in Gilead, which to this day are called Jair's villages. When Jair died, he was buried in Kamon. Thus ended the bloody episode of Abimelech, the first man to be called king in Israel, a title he gained through betrayal and murder, and lost the same way. The story of Abimelech is a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the devastating consequences of violence. It is also a reminder that divine justice, though sometimes slow, is certain. As the narrator says in Judges 9:56-57, God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers. God also made the people of Shechem pay for all their wickedness. The curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, came true. After Abimelech's bloody story, Israel experienced a time of peace under the leadership of 2 judges about whom we know very little. The book of Judges first tells us about Tola, a man from the tribe of Issachar. In Judges 10:1-2, we read, "After Abimelech, Tola, son of Puah, the son of Dodo, rose to save Israel. He was a man of Issachar who lived in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. He led Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried in Shamir. The contrast is striking. After Abimelech, who murdered 70 of his brothers to seize power and ruled with violence for 3 years, comes Tola, who leads for over 2 decades. The text doesn't mention any wars or notable deeds. There are no defeated enemies or recorded miracles. It simply says he saved Israel and ruled for 23 years. Sometimes the greatest leaders are those who bring peace and stability, even if there are no dramatic stories to tell. Interestingly, Tola was from the tribe of Issachar, but lived in Ephraimite territory. This suggests that, despite the tribal conflicts we've seen before, it was still possible for an Israelite to live outside his tribal allotment. After Tola, another judge arose. Judges 10:3-5 introduces us to Jair. He was followed by Jair of Gilead, who led Israel 22 years. He had 30 sons, who rode 30 donkeys and controlled 30 towns in Gilead, which to this day are called Havoth Jair. When Jair died, he was buried in Carmel. Jair came from Gilead, a region east of the Jordan River. The fact that he had 30 sons, each riding his own donkey and governing his own town, indicates that Jair was a wealthy and influential man. Riding donkeys back then was a sign of high status, usually reserved for nobility. The Havoth Jair, literally villages of Jair, show that his legacy endured. Even the author of Judges notes the name was still in use at the time of writing. Together, Tola and Jair led Israel for 45 years of relative peace. No major battles, no dramatic personal trials, just steady leadership that allowed the people to prosper. But that calm didn't last. As we'll see, the cycle of apostasy and oppression was about to begin again. The peace Israel enjoyed under Tola and Jair quickly gave way to chaos. The people forgot the lessons of the past and returned to idolatry. Judges 10:6 reveals the scale of the problem. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals and the Ashtoreths and the gods of Aram, Sidon, Moab, the Ammonites, and the Philistines, because the Israelites forsook the Lord and no longer served him. This wasn't a casual slip into idol worship. This time, Israel fully embraced the gods of all their neighboring nations, outright rejecting Yahweh. The list is staggering. Gods from Aram in the north, Sidon on the Phoenician coast, Moab and Ammon to the east, and the Philistines to the west. It's like they were collecting idols from every direction. God's response was swift and severe. Verse 7 continues, "He became angry with them. He sold them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites." The punishment came at the hands of the very nations whose gods they had chosen to worship. It was as if God was saying, "You prefer their gods, then live under their rule." The oppression was brutal, as described in Judges 10:8. That year they shattered and crushed the Israelites. For 18 years they oppressed all the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan in Gilead, the land of the Amorites. This wasn't just a series of raids. It was sustained, grinding oppression that lasted 18 years. The tribes east of the Jordan, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, suffered first. But it didn't stop there. The Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. Israel was in great distress. In their desperation, the people finally turned back to God. Judges 10:10 records their confession. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, "We have sinned against you, forsaking our God and serving the Baals." But this time, God didn't respond with immediate deliverance. Instead, he reminded them of all the times he had already rescued them and how they kept returning to idols. In verses 11-14, the Lord says, "When the Egyptians, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, the Sidonians, the Amalekites, and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried to me for help, did I not save you from their hands? But you have forsaken me and served other gods, so I will no longer save you." Go and cry out to the gods you have chosen. Let them save you when you are in trouble. It was a direct challenge. God was saying, if you trust those gods so much, ask them for help. Of course, those idols were powerless. The people recognized their failure and showed deeper repentance. In Judges 10:15-16 they respond, "But the Israelites said to the Lord, 'We have sinned. Do with us whatever you think best, but please rescue us now.' Then they got rid of the foreign gods among them and served the Lord, and he could bear Israel's misery no longer." Note the shift. First, they confess their sin, then they accept whatever punishment God deems right, and finally, they take real action by removing the idols. This genuine repentance moved God's heart. He could no longer endure their suffering. The stage was set for another confrontation with their oppressors. The Ammonites gathered and camped in Gilead, while the Israelites assembled at Mizpah. The leaders of Gilead were anxious. The leaders of Gilead said to each other, "Whoever will take the lead in attacking the Ammonites will be head over all who live in Gilead." They needed a brave leader to rise and confront the Ammonites. And God was already preparing that man, someone they had once rejected, but who would now be key to Israel's deliverance. Jephthah's life began with rejection. Judges chapter 11 opens with a blunt account of his background. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family," they said, "because you are the son of another woman." Born from a forbidden relationship, Jephthah had no say in the circumstances of his birth. Yet his half-brothers judged him for it, stripping him of his rightful inheritance. It was a double rejection, first by society for being the son of a prostitute, and then by his own family, who cast him out. Faced with rejection, Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob. There, away from the social structures that had excluded him, he became the leader of a group of adventurers. Judges 11:3 says, "So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a group of worthless men gathered around him and followed him." Some translations render worthless men as empty men or men of no worth, suggesting that Jephthah attracted others who were marginalized by society. Together, they likely lived by raiding caravans or working as mercenaries. It wasn't a respectable life, but Jephthah honed his skills in warfare and earned a reputation as a capable fighter. Years passed. Then, when the Ammonites attacked Israel, the very elders who had allowed his banishment remembered the valiant warrior they had rejected. In their desperation, they went to Tob to find the man they had once despised. Judges 11:4-6 recounts, "Sometime later, when the Ammonites made war on Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. 'Come,' they said, 'be our commander so we can fight the Ammonites.' Jephthah's reply showed he hadn't forgotten the rejection. 'Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble?' The question is heavy with pain. He's essentially saying, 'Did you want me when I was family? No. Did you want me when I lived peacefully in your land? No. Now that you're desperate, you remember me?' The elders of Gilead acknowledged their dire situation and made a tempting offer. 'Nevertheless,' they said, 'we are turning to you now. Come with us to fight the Ammonites, and you will be head over all of us who live in Gilead.' This wasn't just a temporary position as a military commander. They were offering Jephthah permanent leadership as the ruler of all Gilead. For a man who had been denied even his family's inheritance, it was an extraordinary turnaround. Jephthah didn't accept right away. He wanted assurances. 'Suppose you take me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me. Will I really be your head?' The elders gave him a solemn oath. 'The Lord is our witness. We will certainly do as you say.' By invoking the name of God, they turned their promise into a sacred covenant. With that assurance, Jephthah agreed. Judges 11:11 tells us, "So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them, and he repeated all his words before the Lord in Mizpah." The phrase "before the Lord" suggests a formal ceremony, likely held at the sanctuary in Mizpah, where the agreement was ratified in God's presence. The rejected man had now become the leader, ready to face the Ammonites. Before heading into battle, Jephthah tried to resolve the conflict diplomatically, a sign of wisdom and self-control. Instead of rushing into war to prove himself, he first sought to understand the cause of the conflict. Judges 11:12 shows his initiative. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the Ammonite king with the question, "What do you have against us that you have attacked our land?" It was a direct question. What's the problem? Why are you attacking us? The reply revealed a long-standing territorial dispute. In Judges 11:13, the king of the Ammonites responded, "When Israel came up out of Egypt, they took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, all the way to the Jordan. Now give it back peacefully." The Ammonites were laying claim to land that Israel had conquered roughly 300 years earlier during the Exodus. They argued that this territory, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, the region of Gilead, was rightfully theirs and demanded its return. Jephthah didn't accept that version of history. He sent new messengers with a detailed response, displaying deep knowledge of Israel's past. His answer, which spans 16 verses, Judges 11:14-29, is a brilliant legal defense of Israel's right to the land. First, he corrected the record. Israel did not take the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. He explained that when Israel left Egypt, they journeyed through the wilderness to the Red Sea and then to Kadesh. From there, they asked the king of Edom for permission to pass through his land, but were denied. The same happened with the king of Moab. So Jephthah continued. Israel skirted around the lands of Edom and Moab, passed along the eastern border of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon. They did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was its boundary. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, asking for permission to pass through his land to their destination. But Sihon didn't trust Israel and mobilized his army to attack them at Jahaz. The outcome, as Jephthah recounted, was that the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his men into Israel's hands, and they defeated them. Israel took over all the land of the Amorites who lived in that territory. This was the key point in Jephthah's argument. The disputed land never belonged to the Ammonites. It had been Amorite land when Israel conquered it. In Judges 11:23-24, he added a theological dimension. It was the Lord, the God of Israel, who drove out the Amorites before his people Israel. Are you now to take it over? Will you not take what your god Chemosh gives you? Likewise, whatever the Lord our God has given us, we will possess. It was an argument the Ammonite king could understand. In the ancient Middle Eastern worldview, when a god gave victory to his people, the conquered land rightfully became theirs. If your God gives you land, Jephthah argued, you accept it. Our God gave us this land, and we're keeping it. Jephthah also appealed to historical precedent. For 300 years, Israel occupied Heshbon, Aroer, the surrounding settlements, and all the towns along the Arnon River. Why didn't you try to reclaim them during that time? It was a solid argument. If these lands really belonged to Ammon, why had they waited 3 centuries to claim them? It was like saying, the time to contest this is long gone. Jephthah concluded his message by placing the responsibility for any bloodshed squarely on the Ammonite king. I have not wronged you, but you are doing me wrong by waging war against me. Let the Lord, the judge, decide today between the Israelites and the Ammonites. This reference to God as judge wasn't just religious language, it was a declaration of trust that the outcome of the battle would reflect divine judgment about who was truly in the right. Unfortunately, Judges 11:28 tells us that the king of Ammon, however, paid no attention to the message Jephthah sent him. Diplomacy had failed. The matter would now be settled on the battlefield. With negotiations broken down, Jephthah prepared for war. But before he marched out, he did something that would tragically alter his life. Judges 11:29-31 recounts, "Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, 'If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will offer it as a burnt offering.'" This vow reveals both Jephthah's faith and his recklessness. On one hand, he recognized that only God could give victory. On the other, he made a rash promise without considering the consequences. Vows were taken very seriously in Israelite culture. Once made, they had to be fulfilled. Numbers 30.2 says, "When a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he must not break his word, but must do everything he said." With the vow made, Jephthah went into battle, and the result was a sweeping victory. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel-Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. The victory was total, just as Jephthah had hoped. But when he returned home to Mizpah, his triumph turned to tragedy. Judges 11:34 says, "When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of tambourines? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter." The text captures Jephthah's devastation. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." Just imagine the scene. A father returning home victorious, expecting to be greeted with honor, only to have his worst nightmare come true. The one who came out to meet him wasn't a servant or an animal, but his own daughter, his only child. His joy turned instantly to anguish. Jephthah's daughter's response reveals extraordinary character. Rather than complain about her fate, she accepted her father's vow. "My father," she said, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites." Her one request reflected both her youth and the sorrow of never experiencing marriage and motherhood, highly valued in that culture. "But grant me this one thing," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends because I will never marry." Jephthah agreed. "You may go," he said. And he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed. The text doesn't explicitly say what happened to her. Some scholars argue that she was dedicated to lifelong service at the tabernacle, remaining a virgin forever. Others believe she was literally sacrificed. The following verse leans toward the latter interpretation, as it says, "And she never married." From this comes the Israelite tradition that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. That word, commemorate, can also be translated as mourn, suggesting the community annually remembered and grieved her sacrifice. Either way, Jephthah's daughter's life, as she knew it, ended because of her father's impulsive vow. Jephthah's victory over the Ammonites should have been a moment of unity for Israel. Instead, it sparked further division. The tribe of Ephraim, which had not participated in the battle, took offense at being left out. Their reaction was extreme and threatening. In Judges 12:1, we read, "The men of Ephraim called out their forces, crossed over to Zaphon, and said to Jephthah, 'Why did you go to fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you? We're going to burn your house down over your head.'" It was an unfair accusation and a serious threat. Jephthah replied by setting the record straight. "I and my people were engaged in a great struggle with the Ammonites, and although I called, you didn't save me out of their hands. When I saw that you wouldn't help, I took my life in my hands and crossed over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave me the victory. Why have you come up today to fight me?" Jephthah's response made it clear that he had in fact called on the Ephraimites, but they had refused. Now, after the victory, they wanted to claim honor they hadn't earned. This wasn't the first time Ephraim had acted this way. They had done something similar to Gideon, Judges 8:1. But while Gideon responded diplomatically, Jephthah, a man hardened by conflict from his youth, wasn't willing to back down. The situation quickly escalated into a civil war. Judges 12:4 records, "Then Jephthah assembled all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. The Gileadites struck them down because the Ephraimites had said, 'You Gileadites are renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh.'" The Ephraimites' accusation was particularly offensive. They were calling the Gileadites renegades, people with no true tribal identity. For men who placed great value on their tribal heritage, this was a serious insult. The Gileadites seized the fords of the Jordan River to block the Ephraimites from escaping back home. Then they came up with an ingenious test to identify the fugitives. Judges 12:5-6 tells us, "The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim, and whenever a fugitive from Ephraim said, 'Let me cross,' the men of Gilead would ask him, 'Are you an Ephraimite?' If he replied, 'No,' they would say, 'All right, say Shibboleth.' If he said Sibboleth because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 Ephraimites were killed. Shibboleth means stream or ear of grain. The difference in pronunciation was subtle, just the initial consonant, but it revealed a speaker's regional origin. The Ephraimites said Sibboleth, lacking the esh sound. It was much like people from different regions pronouncing certain words differently. This tiny linguistic difference became a death sentence for thousands. The result was devastating. 42,000 Ephraimites died. It was a terrible loss for Israel, a nation meant to be united against external enemies, not fighting among themselves. After this bloody conflict, Jephthah led Israel for 6 years. Then, as Judges 12:7 says, Jephthah the Gileadite led Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in a town in Gilead. The brief mention of his death, without the honorific details often given to other judges, may reflect the mixed nature of his legacy. He delivered Israel from the Ammonites, but also led a civil war against fellow Israelites, and sacrificed his only daughter because of a reckless vow. Jephthah, the rejected son who became a deliverer, left behind a legacy of victory marred by tragedy and division. After Jephthah's death, 3 judges led Israel in succession. We know little about them, only brief details that offer a small glimpse into their lives. They are known as minor judges, not because they were less important, but because the biblical text devotes less space to their stories. The first of them was Ibzan. Judges 12:8-10 reads, "After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem led Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave his daughters in marriage outside his clan and brought in 30 young women from outside for his sons. Ibzan led Israel for 7 years. Then he died and was buried in Bethlehem." Ibzan appears to have been a man of considerable wealth and influence. Having 60 children was extremely unusual and suggests that he had multiple wives, something permitted, though not ideal, in Israelite culture at the time. The text highlights how he arranged marriages for all his children, bringing in 30 women for his sons and sending his daughters to marry into other clans. This extensive web of marriages likely served political and social purposes, forging alliances across families and regions. In an era without formal government structures, family ties were crucial for peace and stability. Interestingly, Ibzan was from Bethlehem, the same town where King David and eventually Jesus would be born. At the time, though, Bethlehem was still a small village, not the renowned city it would later become. After 7 years of leadership, Ibzan died and was succeeded by Elon. Judges 12:11-12 tells us only, after him, Elon the Zebulunite led Israel 10 years. Then Elon died and was buried in Ajalon in the land of Zebulun. We know only his tribe, Zebulun, and that he led for a decade. The text mentions no wars or major events, suggesting a relatively peaceful period. Sometimes the absence of crisis is itself a mark of good leadership. The third of these judges was Abdon. Judges 12:13-15 gives us a bit more detail. After him, Abdon, son of Hillel from Pirathon, led Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, who rode 70 donkeys. He led Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, son of Hillel, died and was buried at Pirathon in Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. Like Ibzan, Abdon appears to have been a man of great wealth and a large family. The note about 70 donkeys is significant. Riding donkeys was a symbol of nobility and leadership at the time. This wasn't just a casual detail, it indicated his family's status and influence. Abdon's hometown, Pirathon, was located in Ephraimite territory, but the text adds an intriguing note that it was in the hill country of the Amalekites. This might suggest it was once inhabited by Amalekites, or that some presence still remained there. These 3 judges, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon, led Israel for a combined total of 25 years. The text records no wars or crises during their time, implying a relatively calm era. After the intense drama of Jephthah's rule, the people likely appreciated this peaceful interlude. It's interesting to contrast these minor judges with figures like Gideon and Jephthah. While the latter emerged in times of crisis and became known for great battles, the minor judges appear to have governed during more stable periods, perhaps consolidating the victories of their predecessors. It's a reminder that leadership takes different forms at different times, sometimes dramatic and bold, other times quiet and administrative, but peace would not last forever. Soon, Israel would once again face one of its most persistent enemies, the Philistines. And for that threat, God was preparing a deliverer unlike any who had come before. The story of Samson begins with a family struggle, a childless couple. In Judges 13:2 we read, "A man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan lived in Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant and they had no children." In ancient Israel, infertility was seen as a deep affliction. Children were considered a divine blessing, and the lack of them was often viewed as a sign of disfavor. This couple had carried that pain for many years, but something extraordinary was about to happen. Judges 13:3-5 tells us the angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, "Even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines." This was a remarkable promise. Not only would the woman have a child, But the child would be special from birth, a Nazirite, someone set apart for God by a special vow. Normally, the Nazirite vow was temporary, but Samson was to be a Nazirite for life. The Nazirite vow had 3 primary restrictions: abstaining from fermented drinks, never cutting one's hair, and avoiding contact with the dead. These rules symbolized total dedication to God. The prophecy that this child would begin to rescue Israel hints that his mission would not be completed in his lifetime. The woman, whose name is never given in the text, told her husband about the encounter. "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, 'You will become pregnant and give birth to a son. Don't drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, and don't eat anything forbidden, for your son will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from the day of his birth until the day of his death.'" Manoah, wanting to confirm the message, prayed to God, asking for the man of God to return and provide more instructions. God heard his prayer, and the angel again appeared to the woman while she was alone in the field. She ran to get her husband, and Manoah followed her to where the angel was. When Manoah asked how they should raise the boy, the angel simply repeated the original instructions to the mother. She must avoid wine, fermented drinks, and unclean food. Nothing was said about how to raise the boy, only about the mother's behavior during pregnancy. Not realizing he was speaking with an angel, Manoah offered hospitality. "We would like you to stay with us. Let us prepare a young goat for you." The angel's response was curious. "Even if you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." Manoah then asked for the visitor's name, and the angel replied, "Why do you ask my name? It is beyond understanding." This mysterious response should have been a clue that their guest was no ordinary man. The couple prepared a young goat and a grain offering on a rock. What happened next confirmed the supernatural nature of their visitor. Judges 13:19-20 recounts, "Then Manoah took a young goat and a grain offering and offered it on a rock to the Lord. And the Lord did an amazing thing. As the flame blazed up from the altar toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame." When Manoah and his wife saw this, they fell with their faces to the ground. Finally realizing who they had spoken to, Manoah was terrified. "We are doomed to die. We have seen God." There was a common belief that seeing God face to face meant certain death, but his wife, showing remarkable insight, reassured him. If the Lord had meant to kill us, he wouldn't have accepted our burnt offering and grain offering. He wouldn't have appeared to us or told us what he did. Manoah's wife demonstrated wisdom and faith. She understood that the acceptance of the offering and the promise of a child were signs of divine favor, not judgment. Throughout the narrative, she shows a more intuitive and steady faith than her husband. As promised, the woman gave birth to a son and named him Samson. Judges 13:24-25 says, "When her son was born, she named him Samson, and the Lord blessed him as he grew up. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he lived in Mahanedan, which is located between the towns of Zorah and Eshtaol." This stirring by the Spirit of the Lord suggests that even in his youth, Samson already felt a divine urge toward his mission against the Philistines. Samson's story truly begins in Judges 14, when, now a grown man, he goes down to Timnah and sees a Philistine woman. He returns home and tells his parents, "I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the Philistines. Get her for me as my wife." His parents were shocked. They asked, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" This was a reasonable concern. Israelites were forbidden from marrying the pagan peoples of Canaan to avoid being led into idolatry. But Samson insisted, "Get her for me. She's the one I want." Then comes a surprising twist in Judges 14:4. His parents did not realize that this was the Lord's doing, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. This is an intriguing note. Samson's attraction to the Philistine woman, while against God's law, was somehow part of God's broader plan to create conflict with the Philistines. It wasn't that God approved of intermarriage or caused Samson's disobedience, but he was using even Samson's flawed choices to advance his greater purpose. While Samson and his parents were on their way to Timnah, a young lion suddenly attacked him. Judges 14:6 says, "The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands as easily as if it were a young goat." But he didn't tell his father or mother what he had done. This was the first sign of Samson's supernatural strength, a gift God would use to deliver Israel. Interestingly, Samson kept the event to himself, an early hint of his fondness for secrecy and riddles. Sometime later, when Samson returned to Timnah to marry the woman, he turned off the path to look at the lion's carcass. Inside it, he then found a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out some of the honey, ate it, and gave some to his parents without telling them where it had come from. During the wedding feast, Samson proposed a riddle to the 30 young Philistine men who were with him. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. If they could solve the riddle within 7 days, he would give them 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If they couldn't, they would have to give him the same. The Philistines couldn't. Figure it out. And by the 4th day, they threatened Samson's wife. "Coax your husband into telling us the answer, or we'll burn you and your father's house to the ground." Under pressure, the woman pleaded with Samson until he finally told her. She immediately passed the answer to the Philistines. On the 7th day, just before the deadline, the men said to Samson, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Realizing he had been betrayed, Samson said, "If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have solved my riddle." Furious, but empowered by the Spirit of the Lord, Samson went down to the city of Ashkelon, struck down 30 men, took their clothes, and gave them to the ones who had answered the riddle. Then he returned to his father's house, abandoning his wife, who was given to the man who had served as his best man. Later, during the wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife, bringing a young goat. But her father wouldn't let him in. "I was so sure you hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your best man. Her younger sister is even more beautiful. Take her instead." Samson replied, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." So he caught 300 foxes, tied them together in pairs by the tails, attached a torch to each pair, lit the torches, and released them into the Philistines' grain fields. The fire destroyed not only the harvested grain and the standing wheat, but also the vineyards and olive groves. When the Philistines learned that Samson had done this because his father-in-law had given his wife to another man, they retaliated by burning the woman and her father to death. Samson responded, "Since you acted like this, I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." And he attacked them ferociously, slaughtering many. Afterward, Samson went to live in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines came and invaded Judah, looking for him. When the men of Judah asked why they were under attack, the Philistines said, "We've come to capture Samson and do to him what he did to us." 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave and said to Samson, "Don't you realize the Philistines rule over us? What have you done to us?" Samson replied, "I only did to them what they did to me." They said, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to them." Samson agreed, as long as they promised not to kill him themselves. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. When they reached Lehi, the Philistines came shouting toward him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax and fell off his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. After the victory, Samson composed a short poem. With a donkey's jawbone, I made them a heap. With a donkey's jawbone, I killed 1,000 men. Then he threw away the jawbone and called the place Ramath Lehi, Jawbone Hill. Exhausted and extremely thirsty, Samson cried out to the Lord, "You've given your servant this great victory. Now will I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised." God opened up a spring in Lehi, and Samson drank. His strength returned and he revived. So he named the spring En-Hakkore, Kala's spring, which was still there at the time the book was written. The chapter ends with this note: Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. The story continues with Samson going to Gaza, one of the Philistines' major cities. Judges 16 opens with an episode that highlights both his strength and his weakness. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute and spent the night with her. Word spread quickly among the people of Gaza, "Samson is here." Here we already see a troubling pattern. Samson was called to deliver Israel from the Philistines, yet instead of attacking them, he visited their cities and got involved with their women. He wasn't resisting the enemy, he was cozying up to them. The men of the city surrounded the place and waited at dawn to kill him. But Samson got up in the middle of the night. Since the city gates were locked, he did something incredible. He grabbed the doors of the city gate, along with the 2 posts and the crossbar, lifted them onto his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill facing Hebron. Imagine the scene: a man tearing down the massive wooden and metal gates of a fortified city, hoisting them onto his shoulders and hiking up a hill with them. It was a mind-blowing display of power, sure to intimidate the Philistines. But Samson seemed more interested in showing off his strength than using it for the freedom of his people. Some time later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. When the Philistine rulers heard about this, they saw a golden opportunity. In Judges 16:5, they came to Delilah with a proposal: "Seduce him and find out the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." It was a fortune, over 5,000 pieces of silver in total. The temptation was too great. Delilah began pressing Samson relentlessly. "Tell me, please, what is the source of your great strength and how you can be bound and subdued?" Samson replied with a lie. "If someone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." The Philistine leaders brought the bowstrings to Delilah, and she tied Samson up while he was sleeping. Then she shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are attacking you!" But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a strand of yarn snaps when it touches fire. Delilah realized she had been deceived and complained, "You've made a fool of me and told me lies. Now tell me how you can be bound." Samson lied again. "If I'm tightly bound with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes, tied him up, and again shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are attacking you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were mere threads. Delilah wasn't done yet. "You've been mocking me and lying to me all this time. Tell me how you can be bound," he answered. "If you weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on a loom and fasten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." While he was sleeping, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the loom, fastened it with the pin, and shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are attacking you!" But once again he awoke and pulled out the pin and the loom. Frustrated, Delilah began to press Samson daily. "How can you say you love me if you don't trust me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." Judges 16:16 says, "With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. Finally, Samson gave in and told her everything. No razor has ever touched my head because I have been a Nazirite, dedicated to God from my birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. Delilah knew he had told her the truth this time. She sent for the Philistine leaders. "Come back once more, he has told me everything." So the rulers returned, bringing the silver they had promised. Judges 16:19 describes the moment of betrayal. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him. And his strength left him. When Delilah shouted, "Samson, the Philistines are attacking you," he woke up thinking, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he didn't realize that the Lord had left him. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze shackles and set him to grinding grain in prison. It was a dramatic fall for a man who had once carried away the gates of that very city. Yet even in this dark moment, there is a spark of hope. Judges 16:22 tells us, "But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved." Amidst the darkness, imprisonment, and humiliation, something was happening, something the Philistines didn't notice. Samson's hair, the symbol of his consecration to God, was growing back, and with it perhaps came one last chance to fulfill his calling. The Philistines were celebrating a great victory. They had captured Samson, the man who had terrorized them for years. Now he was blind, chained, and humiliated, forced to grind grain like an animal. It was time to praise their God. Judges 16:23-24 says, "Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to celebrate, saying, 'Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands.' When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, 'Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our dead.'" Dagon was the chief deity of the Philistines, depicted as half man, half fish. Considered a god of fertility, he embodied the agricultural cycle. The festival in his honor was one of the most important religious events of the Philistine calendar. The celebration intensified. The atmosphere grew wild. After they had drunk a lot, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they brought Samson from the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, the scene is utterly humiliating. The mighty judge of Israel was now a laughingstock, paraded like a fool before his enemies at a pagan festival. But Samson had a plan. The Temple of Dagon was a massive structure capable of holding thousands. Its central hall was supported by pillars, and the flat rooftop was packed with spectators. In Judges 16:26, Samson makes a request. Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." The place was packed. The temple was full of men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed. After months of blindness, pain, and humiliation, perhaps he finally understood his true purpose. Judges 16:28 records his cry, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Notice Samson doesn't ask to live. He knows he will die in what he's about to do, but he wants his death to have meaning. To fulfill the calling he was born for, to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Finding the 2 central pillars, Samson positioned himself. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." With one final superhuman effort he pushed. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Samson's death became his greatest victory. That day, the top Philistine leaders perished, severely weakening their hold over Israel. His family came to retrieve his body. His brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel for 20 years. Thus ended the life of Israel's most contradictory judge, a man of evident weaknesses, whose extraordinary physical strength stood in stark contrast to his inability to control his own desires. Yet, even in death, he fulfilled his calling by delivering Israel from its oppressors. Judges chapter 17 reveals how religion in Israel had become deeply corrupted. We're no longer following the exploits of mighty deliverers, but rather peering into the private lives of ordinary people who had strayed from the path God had set. The chapter opens with a man named Micah confessing to a theft. Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it." His mother's reaction is startling. Instead of rebuking her son for stealing, she blesses him. Then his mother said, "The Lord bless you, my son." When Micah returned the 1,100 silver shekels, she made a declaration, "I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son's benefit, to make an image overlaid with silver. I will give it back to you." This is a clear sign of how distorted worship had become in Israel. She believed she was honoring the Lord by commissioning an idol, something explicitly forbidden in the Ten Commandments. She gave 200 shekels back to her son, who then took them to a silversmith to have an image and idol made. In Judges 17:5-6, we read more about Micah. Now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some household gods, and installed one of his sons as his priest. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. That last line is key to understanding the entire era of the Judges. Without centralized leadership to enforce God's law, everyone interpreted religion their own way. Micah had essentially invented his own personal version of worship, with a private shrine, household gods, and even his son acting as priest, though only members of the tribe of Levi were authorized to serve as priests. One day, a young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, traveling in search of a place to settle, arrived at Micah's house. In Judges 17:9-10, we read about their meeting. Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah," he said, "and I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah said to him, "Live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes and your food." The offer was tempting, and the Levite agreed to stay. He became like one of Micah's own sons. Micah then consecrated the Levite, who became his personal priest and lived in his house. With this, Micah believed he had secured divine favor. "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest." He assumed that having an official Levite legitimized his household worship, even though it mixed genuine worship with idolatry. Meanwhile, the tribe of Dan was struggling to settle in the land allotted to them. Judges 18:1 tells us, "In those days, Israel had no king, and in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel." The Danites were unable to fully dislodge the original inhabitants, especially the Amorites, who restricted them to the hill country. So, they decided to look for new territory, sending out 5 brave men as spies. On their journey, these men passed by Micah's house and recognized the Levite's voice. They stopped to speak with him and asked, "What are you doing in this place? What brings you here?" The Levite explained his arrangement with Micah. "Micah has hired me, and I am his priest. Then the spies asked for divine guidance. Please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. The Levite gave them a favorable answer. Go in peace, your journey has the Lord's approval. The 5 men then traveled to Laish, a city far to the north, isolated from other Israelite tribes. They saw that the people there lived in peace and security, like the Sidonians, carefree, unsuspecting, and unaligned with any other group. The land was spacious, fertile, and lacking nothing. The spies returned with their report. Let's attack them. We've seen that the land is very good. Why wait? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you arrive, you'll find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing. So 600 armed men from the tribe of Dan set out to conquer Laish. On their way, they again passed by Micah's house. The 5 spies told the others about the religious objects they had seen there. You know that one of these houses has an ephod, some household gods, a carved image, and a cast idol. Now you know what to do. The Danites decided to steal Micah's religious items. In Judges 18:18-19, we read what happened when they confronted the Levite. When the men went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the cast idol, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" They answered him, "Be quiet, don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and clan in Israel as priest rather than just one man's household?" The Levite liked the proposal. Judges 18:20 says, "The priest was very pleased. He took the ephod, the household gods, and the carved image, and went along with the people." When Micah and his neighbors realized what had happened, they pursued the Danites and caught up with them. "What's the matter with you that you called out your men to fight?" they asked. Micah replied, "You took the gods I made and my priest and went away. What do I have left? How can you even ask? What's the matter with you?" The Danites' response was a direct threat. "Don't argue with us, or some of the men may get angry and attack you, and your family will lose your lives." Faced with this threat, Micah, realizing they were far too strong for him, turned back and returned home. The Danites continued their journey with the stolen priest and idols. When they arrived at Laish, they attacked the peaceful and unsuspecting people. They struck them down with the sword and burned the city. There was no one to rescue them, because Laish was far from Sidon and had no alliance with anyone. After destroying the city, the Danites rebuilt it and settled there, renaming it Dan in honor of their ancestor. They set up the stolen idols and appointed the Levite and his descendants as priests for the tribe until the time of the exile, when the Ark of God was still in Shiloh. This episode reveals not only the growing idolatry in Israel, but also how law and justice had deteriorated. An entire tribe stole idols, and a priest from a private citizen threatened him with death when he protested, and then massacred a peaceful city to establish their new territory. All of this was done with the blessing of a Levite priest, someone who should have known and taught God's law. Judges chapter 19 recounts one of the darkest episodes in the Bible, showing how deeply morality had declined in Israel. The story begins, "In those days when there was no king in Israel, a Levite living in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. This Levite, unlike the one from the previous story, is not portrayed as an idolater. He lived in a remote region of Ephraim and had a concubine, a secondary wife with fewer legal rights, from Bethlehem. However, their relationship was not going well. She was unfaithful to him and left, returning to her father's house in Bethlehem, Judah. After 4 months, her husband went to persuade her to return. He took his servant and 2 donkeys. The young woman's father was glad to receive the Levite and urged him to stay a few days. The hospitality stretched out longer than expected, and the Levite ended up staying 5 days. Finally, on the 5th day in the afternoon, he departed with his concubine and servant, despite his father-in-law's attempts to make him stay another night. Since it was already late, they only made it as far as Jebus, the former name of Jerusalem, by sunset. The servant suggested they stay in the city of the Jebusites, but the Levite refused. "We will not stay in a foreign city whose people are not Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah or Ramah." The irony of this decision would soon become clear. The Levite chose not to stay in a foreign city, assuming they would receive better hospitality in an Israelite town. The reality would prove to be very different. They arrived in Gibeah, a city of the tribe of Benjamin, after the sun had set. They sat in the city square, but no one offered them lodging for the night. Hospitality was a core value in the ancient Near East, and this lack of welcome already signaled that something was wrong in Gibeah. Eventually, an old man, also from the hill country of Ephraim but living in Gibeah, was returning from his work in the fields and saw them in the square. He asked, "Where are you going? Where do you come from?" The Levite explained their situation and assured him that they had everything they needed: straw and fodder for the donkeys, and bread and wine for himself, his concubine, and the servant. All they lacked was a place to sleep. The old man insisted, "Peace be with you. Let me supply all your needs, but don't spend the night in the square." He took them into his house, fed the donkeys, and after they had washed their feet, they ate and drank. While they were enjoying themselves, wicked men from the city surrounded the house. In Judges 19:22, we read, "While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the house, 'Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him.'" The scene is disturbingly similar to what happened with the angels who visited Lot in Sodom, Genesis 19. The men of the city wanted to sexually assault the guest, showing utter contempt for God's law and the basic norms of hospitality. The old man tried to protect his guest. "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can abuse them and do whatever you wish. But don't do such a disgraceful thing to this man." This shocking offer reveals not only the low value placed on women in that society, but also how sacred the duty to protect a guest was considered. Yet the men refused to listen. What happened next is truly horrific. Judges 19:25 reports, "But the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night. At dawn, they let her go. At daybreak, the woman collapsed at the entrance of the house where her master was staying and lay there until daylight. When the Levite got up in the morning and opened the door to set out on his journey, he saw his concubine lying at the door with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go." There was no answer. The woman was dead, a victim of the previous night's brutality. The Levite put her on his donkey and went home. Once there, he took a knife, cut her body into 12 pieces, and sent them throughout the territory of Israel with a message about the terrible crime committed in Gibeah. Everyone who saw it said, "Such a thing has never been seen or done since the day the Israelites came up out of Egypt. Consider it. Take counsel. Speak up." The Levite had turned his personal tragedy into a national scandal, forcing Israel to confront the depravity that had taken root in its society. The response would be dramatic, leading to another tragedy, a civil war. The Levite's strategy worked. The horrific crime in Gibeah stirred the indignation of all Israel. Judges 21:2 tells us, "Then all Israel from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came together as one and assembled before the Lord. In Mizpah, the leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 men armed with swords. This was an extraordinary nationwide mobilization. From Dan to Beersheba was an expression that referred to the entire territory of Israel from north to south. The number of soldiers assembled, 400,000, shows just how seriously the matter was taken. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah, but apparently chose not to participate in the National Assembly. During the gathering, the Levite explained what had happened. In Judges 24-7, he says, "I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. During the night, the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. So I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent a piece to each region of Israel's inheritance, because they committed this shameful act in Israel. Now all you Israelites, speak up and decide what must be done." The Levite's account leaves out some crucial details, most notably the fact that he was the one who handed his concubine over to the men of Gibeah. He also says they intended to kill him, when the original text makes clear they meant to rape him. These distortions were likely made to secure the full support of the tribes. The response was unanimous. All the people rose as one and said, "Not one of us will go home. Not one of us will return to his tent. This is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it as the lot determines. We'll select 10 men out of every 100 from all. The tribes of Israel, 100 out of every 1,000 and 1,000 out of every 10,000, to provide provisions for the army. Then when the army arrives at Gibeah in Benjamin, it will repay them for the outrageous act they committed in Israel." The plan was clear. The united tribes would march against Gibeah to punish those responsible for the crime. But before launching an attack, they tried a diplomatic approach. They sent messengers throughout the tribe of Benjamin saying, "What is this wickedness that has taken place among you? Hand over those wicked men of Gibeah so that we may put them to death and purge this evil from Israel." It was a reasonable demand. They weren't seeking to punish the whole tribe, only the perpetrators. But the Benjamites' response was shocking. But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. Instead, they prepared for war. From their towns, they came together at Gibeah to fight against the Israelites. At once, the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their towns, in addition to 700 chosen men from those living in Gibeah. Among all these soldiers were 700 select troops who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Rather than handing over the guilty, the tribe of Benjamin chose to protect them. It was a decision that revealed just how far their moral compass had eroded. Tribal loyalty outweighed justice. On the other side, the united tribes also gathered their forces. The Israelites, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them experienced warriors. Before going into battle, the Israelites went up to Bethel to consult God. "Who of us shall go first to fight against the Benjamites?" The Lord replied, "Judah shall go first." The stage was set for one of the most tragic civil wars in Israel's history. A nation that was supposed to be united in worship of the Lord and obedience to divine law was now about to turn its weapons on itself. The next morning, the Israelites encamped near Gibeah to launch their attack. But the first battle didn't go as expected. In Judges 20:21, we read, "The Benjamites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day." This unexpected defeat shook the Israelites. Even though they vastly outnumbered their opponents, they lost thousands of men. They went up to the sanctuary, wept before the Lord until evening, and asked, "Shall we go up again to fight against "The Benjamites, our fellow Israelites." The Lord answered, "Go up against them." So the Israelites gathered their courage and took their positions again at the same place as the first day. But when they advanced on the second day, they were again defeated. The Benjamites came out from Gibeah to meet them and cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. This second loss was even more devastating. In just 2 days, 40,000 Israelites had fallen. The entire army went up to Bethel, where they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted until evening and offered burnt offerings and fellowship, offerings to the Lord. This time, their inquiry to God was more earnest, and the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days, the Ark of the Covenant of God was there, with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, "Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites, or not?" The mention of Phinehas helps date the event. This was still within the first few decades after Joshua's death, not long after the conquest of Canaan. The Lord answered, "Go, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands." Then the Israelites set an ambush around Gibeah. When the Benjamites came out to fight, the Israelites retreated strategically, drawing them away from the city. The Benjamites began killing Israelites as before, about 30 men along the roads and in the fields. Confident, the Benjamites said, "We are defeating them as before." But the Israelites had agreed, "We will flee and draw them away from the city onto the roads." Meanwhile, 10,000 chosen Israelites emerged from their positions west of Gibeah. The battle was intense, but the Benjamites had no idea of the disaster looming. They did not realize that disaster was about to overtake them. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and that day the Israelites struck down 2,100 Benjamite swordsmen. Then the Benjamites realized they were beaten. The men of Israel had retreated before the Benjamites because they were relying on the ambush they had set near Gibeah. Those in ambush rushed into the city, spread out, and put all its inhabitants to the sword. The agreed-upon signal was a large column of smoke rising from the city. When the Israelites in the main battle saw the smoke, they changed tactics and turned against the Benjamites, who had already killed about 30 Israelites. The Benjamites, seeing the smoke rising from the city, were struck with fear. The Benjamites looked and saw the smoke from the city going up into the sky. Then panic overwhelmed them, for they realized that disaster had come upon them. They tried to flee toward the wilderness, but were pursued and surrounded. Judges 20:43-44 describes the massacre. They surrounded the Benjamites, chased them relentlessly, and overtook them east of Gibeah. 18,000 Benjamites, all brave warriors, fell that day. The remaining survivors fled toward the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon. But along the roads, the Israelites killed another 5,000 Benjamites and continued pursuing the rest all the way to Gidom, where they killed 2,000 more. In total, 25,000 Benjamites, every one of them a valiant warrior, were killed that day. Only 600 men escaped to the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed for 4 months. Then the Israelites returned to the towns of Benjamin and killed everything they found, people, animals, everything. They also set fire to every town they came across. The tribe of Benjamin stood on the brink of extinction. Out of 26,000 warriors, only 600 survived, hiding on a rock in the wilderness. No Benjamite women or children remained alive. It was an unprecedented calamity for Israel. The initial fury toward Benjamin began to give way to remorse. In Judges 21:13, we read, "At Mizpah the men of Israel had taken an oath, 'Not one of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite.' The people went to Bethel and sat before God until evening, weeping loudly and bitterly. 'O Lord God of Israel,' they cried, 'why has this happened in Israel? Why should one tribe be missing from Israel today?' The thought of losing one of the 12 tribes horrified them. They had vowed not to give their daughters in marriage to the Benjamites, but now they realized this would mean the end of the tribe. How could the 600 survivors ever find wives? The next morning they built an altar and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then they remembered another oath they had made. Who among all the tribes of Israel failed to appear before the Lord at Mizpah? They had vowed that anyone who failed to appear would be put to death. It turned out that no one from Jabesh Gilead had joined the assembly. To confirm, they conducted a census and found no one from that city. So the assembly sent 12,000 warriors to Jabesh Gilead with orders to kill every inhabitant, including women and children. The only exception would be the young virgin girls who were to be spared. They found 400 virgin girls in Jabesh Gilead and brought them to the camp at Shiloh in the land of Canaan. Then the whole assembly sent a peace offering to the Benjamites at the rock of Rimmon, inviting them to return. The 600 Benjamite men came back and received the women from Jabesh Gilead who had been spared. But it wasn't enough. There were only 400 women for 600 men. 200 Benjamites were still without wives. The people were distressed over Benjamin's fate, for the Lord had created a breach among the tribes of Israel. The leaders of the assembly asked, "How can we find wives for those who are left, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed?" They couldn't simply give their own daughters because of the oath. Then someone came up with another solution. "Look, there's the annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh, north of Bethel, east of the road that goes from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebanah." They instructed the remaining Benjamite men, "Go hide in the vineyards and watch. When the young women of Shiloh come out to join the dancing, each of you should rush out of the vineyards and seize one of them to be your wife. Then return to the land of Benjamin." If the girls' fathers or brothers came to complain, the Israelite leaders would say, "Do us a favor, let them keep the women. We couldn't find wives for them in battle. And besides, you didn't actually give your daughters to them, so you're not breaking your oath." The Benjamites followed the plan. Each man kidnapped one of the girls who were dancing and took her as his wife. Then they returned to their land, rebuilt their towns, and settled there. This bizarre arrangement allowed the Israelites to technically get around their oath, though it clearly violated the spirit of the law. The young women of Shiloh had no say. They were simply taken. With that, the immediate crisis was resolved. The tribe of Benjamin was preserved, though drastically reduced. The Israelites then dispersed, returning to their tribes and clans, each to his own inheritance. The book of Judges ends with a sentence that perfectly sums up the moral and social chaos of the time. "In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." That phrase appears 4 times throughout the book, underscoring how the absence of a central authority to enforce God's law led to moral decay. What began with idolatry and disobedience ended in horrific crimes and civil war. The story of Judges serves as a stark warning of what happens when a people abandons its moral and spiritual foundations. The nation that had once entered the Promised Land, united and full of purpose, was now torn apart by internal conflict, with one of its 12 tribes nearly wiped out. My friend, we've reached the end of this incredible journey through the book of Judges. We've seen how Israel went from a unified nation under Joshua to a people without direction, where everyone did what was right in his own eyes. We followed unlikely heroes like Gideon and Samson, witnessed the courage of Deborah and the tragedy of Jephthah, and saw just how far a people can fall when they stray from divine principles. This story, over 3,000 years old, still speaks volumes today. It reminds us that the choices we make, as individuals and as a society, carry real consequences. If you enjoyed this perspective on the Book of Judges and want more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps me keep producing these biblical narratives we all love. And why not share this video with your friends and family? There might be someone in your circle who needs to experience these stories in a fresh and engaging way. In the upcoming episodes, we'll continue our journey through the pages of the Bible, discovering together the treasures of this extraordinary book. Until then, stay in peace.